Graphing f of x equals ax squared. The graph of a quadratic function is known as a parabola. So we will be referring to this graph shape, this U-shaped graph, as a parabola. So the parent function we talked about in the last section is f of x equals x squared. Any changes to that graph is considered a transformation. So the vertex is the lowest point of that graph. So the lowest point or the highest point, if it's opening down, is considered the vertex. The axis of symmetry is the line that splits that parabola into two equal shapes. So that line that goes through the vertex is considered the axis of symmetry. So we're going to practice identifying and drawing the vertex and the axis of symmetry on the graphs for the practice. So if we are looking at the graph for number 1, because it's opening up, the lowest point of that graph is the vertex. The vertex is a point, so we should have an x and a y. So negative 1, 1 is the vertex. And we split this graph into two parts. Remember, the axis of symmetry goes through the vertex. So the axis of symmetry is a line. So therefore, it's x equals something. So it's x equal that line that goes through the vertex. It's a vertical line. So it will be x equals negative 1. For number 2, our vertex will be the highest point in this case. So our vertex is at 3, 4. And the axis of symmetry is the line that goes through the vertex and splits the parabola into two equal parts. So the axis of symmetry is x equals 3. Graphing f of x equals ax squared when a is greater than 0 or when a is positive. So when a is a fraction, you have a vertical shrink. When your graph is a vertical shrink, your graph gets wider. So examples of that are f of x is equal to 1/2 x squared, y is equal to 1/3 x squared, and y is equal to 0.2 x squared. Then a vertical stretch is when your graph gets skinnier. Examples of that are f of x is equal to 2x squared, y is equal to 4x squared, and y is equal to 1.5 x squared. For this next one, we're going to graph the function and then compare the graph to the parent function. So basically describing whether there is a reflection, vertical stretch, or vertical shrink. So for the first one, f of x is equal to 2x squared. So remember, we have to graph it first. So we need to plug in values of x to find values of y. So for the first one, 2 times negative 1 squared equals 2, if we type it into our calculators. For the next one, 2 times 0 squared is equal to 0. And then 2 times 1 squared is equal to 2. So let's graph those. Negative 1, 2, 0, 0, and 1 in the x, 2 in the y. And connect our points. So let's look at our function. F of x is equal to 2x squared. So there is no reflection because we talked about last time that if it was a reflection, it has to be a negative in front. And then we want to determine if there's a vertical stretch or shrink. There is a vertical stretch because a is equal to 2. Because a, the number in front of x squared, is 2, there is a vertical stretch. So let's look at number 2. Number 2, we're going to do the same thing. We are going to plug in values of x into the function to find our values of y. So f of x, or y, equals 1/3 x squared. So I'm going to plug in negative 3 for x. So 1 over 3 times 3 squared. So we have to put this in our calculator if we can't do mental math to do it. So you will have 1/3 times 9. And if you put this in your calculator, you should get 3. The next one is 1/3 times 0 squared. So 1/3 times 0 squared is 0. And then 1/3 times 3 squared, which is equal to 3. So now we have our 3 points, negative 3, 3. So let's graph that. Negative 3 in the x, 3 in the y. Put a point, 0, 0, and then 3, positive 3. And then we draw our parabola. And you see it's opening wider than the one that we did in number 1. So this would be an example of a vertical shrink because A is equal to 1/3. That is a vertical shrink. All right, so let's look at the next one. When graphing f of x equals ax squared when a is less than 0. So basically when a is negative. So when a is negative, you can have a vertical shrink and a reflection in the x-axis. So if it was a negative fraction, then it will be a vertical shrink and a reflection in the x-axis. So an example of those are f of x is equal to 1/2 x, f of x is equal to negative 1/4 x to the second power, and f of x is equal to negative 0.5 x to the second power. The next one is when a is less than negative 1. So it's a vertical stretch. So vertical stretch is when it's a number that's bigger than 1 and it's negative. So it'll be a negative number that's bigger than 1. So an example of that would be f of x is equal to negative 2x squared and y is equal to negative 4.3x squared because 4.3, even though it's a decimal, it is bigger than 1. So let's do some practice for this. If we are looking at the function m of x is equal to negative 4x, we can graph this. So the first thing we're going to do is plug in my values of x to find y. So negative 4 times negative 1 squared, which is negative 4. And then negative 4 times 0 squared, which is equal to 0. And then negative 4 times 1 squared, which is equal to negative 4. So now we have our 3 points. Let's graph. Negative 1 in the x, negative 4 on the y, 0 in the x, 0 on the y, 1 in the x, negative 4 in the y. So you notice that it's skinnier and it's opening down. So because a is equal to negative 4, there's going to be a vertical stretch and a reflection in the x-axis. So number 4, we have n of x is equal to 1/5 x to the second power. So wherever there's an x, I'm going to put this number so I can find my y values. So negative 1/5 x times negative 5 to the second power. So negative 5 to the second power is 25 divided by negative 5, which is negative 5. And you can put this in your calculator. You don't have to do mental math. So negative 1/5 times 0 to the second power, which is 0. And then the last one, negative 1/5 times 5 to the second power is equal to negative 5 again. So we have 0. Well, we have negative 5 in the x, negative 5 in the y, 0 in the x, 0 in the y, and then 5 in the x, negative 5 in the y. And now we can graph our parabola. So if we look at this, if we look at the value of A is equal to negative 1 over 5. So because it is a fraction, we know that it's a shrink. And because it's negative, we know that it is a reflection in the x-axis.